Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Greek mythology. Yeah, we're making our way through this. But today we are picking up with the 16th chapter, The Adventures of Aeneas. So, yeah, let's go ahead and hop into this. The Aeneid, the greatest of Latin poems, is the chief authority for this story. It was written when Augustus had taken over the bankrupt Roman world after the chaos that had followed Caesar's assassination. His strong hand ended the furious civil wars and brought about the Pax Augusta, which lasted nearly half a century. Virgil and all his generation were fired with enthusiasm for the new order, and the Aeneid was written to exalt the empire, to provide a great national hero and a founder for the race destined to hold the world beneath its rule. Virgil's patriotic purpose is probably responsible for the change from the human Aeneas of the first books to the unhuman prodigy of the last. The poet was finally carried away into the purely fantastic by his determination to create a hero for Rome that would make all other heroes seem insignificant. A tendency to exaggeration was a Roman trait. The Latin names of the gods are, of course, used, and the Latin forms of the case of any personage who has a Latin as well as a Greek name. Ulysses, for instance, is Latin for Odysseus. Part 1. From Troy to Italy. Aeneas, the son of Venus, was among the most famous of the heroes who fought in the Trojan War. On the Trojan side, he was second only to Hector. When the Greeks captured Troy, he was able, with his mother's help, to escape the city with his father and his little son, and to sail away to a new home. After long wanderings and many trials on land and sea, he reached Italy, where he defeated those who opposed his entering the country, married the daughter of a powerful king, and founded a city. He was always held to be the real founder of Rome because Romulus and Remus, the actual founders, were born in the city his son built, in Alba Longa. When he set sail from Troy, many Trojans had joined him. All were eager to find somewhere to settle, but no one had any clear idea where that should be. Several times they started to build a city, but they were always driven away by misfortunes or bad omens. At last, Aeneas was told in a dream that his place destined for them was a country far away to the west, Italy, in those days called Hesperia, the western country. They were then on the island of Crete, and although the promised land was distant by a long voyage over unknown seas, they were thankful for the assurance that they would someday have their own home, and they started at once on the journey. Before they reached their desired haven, however, a long time passed and much happened, which, if they had known beforehand, might have checked their eagerness. Although the Argonauts had sailed east from Greece, and Aeneas's company were westward bound from Crete, the Trojans came upon the Harpies just as Jason and his men had done. The Greek heroes had been bolder, however, or else better swordsmen. They were on the point of killing the horrid creatures when Iris intervened, but the Trojans were driven away by them and forced to put out to sea to escape them. At the next landing place, they met, to their amazement, Hector's wife, Andromache. When Troy fell, she had been given to Neoptolemus, sometimes called Pyrrhus, Achilles' son, the man who had killed old Priam at the altar. He soon abandoned her for Hermione, Helen's daughter, but he did not long survive this marriage, and after his death, Andromache married the Trojan prophet Helenus. They were now ruling the country and, of course, were rejoiced to welcome Aeneas and his men. They entertained them with the utmost hospitality, and before they bade them farewell, Helenus gave them useful advice about their journey. They must not land on the nearest coast of Italy, the east coast, he told them, because it was full of Greeks. Their destined home was on the west coast, somewhat to the north, but they must by no means take the shortest way and go up between Sicily and Italy. In those waters was that most perilous strait guarded by Scylla and Charybdis, which the Argonauts had succeeded in passing only because Thetis helped them, and where Ulysses had lost 6 of his men. It is not clear how the Argonauts, on their way from Asia to Greece, got to the west coast of Italy, nor, for that matter, how Ulysses did either, but at any rate, there was no doubt in Helenus' mind exactly where the strait was, and he gave Aeneas careful directions how to avoid those pests to mariners, by making a long circuit southward around Sicily and reaching Italy far to the north of the whirlpool of implacable Charybdis and the black cavern into which Scylla sucked up whole ships. When the Trojans had taken leave of their kind host and had successfully rounded the eastern tip of Italy, they kept on sailing southward around Sicily with all confidence in their prophetic guide. Apparently, however, for all this mysterious powers, Helenus was not aware that Sicily, at least the southern part, was now occupied by the Cyclopes, for he did not warn the Trojans against landing there. They reached the island after sunset and made a camp on the shore with no hesitation at all. Probably they would all have been captured and eaten if very early the next morning, before any of the monsters were astir, a poor wretch of a man had not come running to where Aeneas was lying. He threw himself upon his knees, but indeed his obvious misery was enough of an appeal, his pallor like that of a half-dead from starvation, his clothes held together only by thorns, his face squalid to the extreme with a thick growth of hair. He was one of Ulysses' sailors, he told them, who had been left behind unintentionally in Polyphemus' cave, and had ever since lived in the woods on whatever he could find there, terrified perpetually lest one of the Cyclopes should come upon him. There were hundreds of them, he said, all as big as and as frightful as Polyphemus. Fly, he urged them, up and away with all speed. Break the ropes that hold the boats to the shore. They did as he said, cutting the cables, making breathless haste, all as silently as possible, but they had only launched the ships when the blind giant was seen slowly making his way down to the shore to wash the cavity where his eye had been, which still flowed with blood. He heard the splashing of the oars, and he rushed toward the sound, out into the sea. The Trojans, however, had got enough of a start. Before he could reach them, the water had deepened too much, even for his towering height. They escaped that peril, but only to meet another as great. While rounding Sicily, they were struck by a storm such as there never was before or since. The waves were so high that their crests licked the stars, and the gulfs between them so deep that the floor of the ocean was disclosed. It was clearly something more than a mere mortal storm, and in fact, point of fact, Juno was back of it. She hated all Trojans, of course. She never forgot the judgment of Paris, and she had been Troy's bitterest enemy during the war, but she felt an especial hatred for Aeneas. She knew that Rome, which was to be founded by men of Trojan blood, although generations after Aeneas, was destined by the fates to conquer Carthage someday, and Carthage was her pet city, beloved by her beyond all other places on earth. It is not known whether she really thought she could go against the decrees of the fates, which Jupiter himself could not do, but certainly she did her best to drown Aeneas. She went to Aeolus, the king of the winds, who had tried to help Ulysses, and asked him to sink the Trojan ships, promising him in return her loveliest nymph for his wife. The stupendous storm was the result. It would undoubtedly have done all that Juno wished if it had not been for Neptune. As Juno's brother, he was quite aware of her way of doing things, and it did not suit him to have her interfere with his sea. He was as cautious, however, in dealing with her as Jupiter always was. He said not a word to her, but contented himself with sending a stern reprimand to Aeolus. Then he calmed the sea and made it possible for the Trojans to get to land. The north coast of Africa was where they finally beached their ships. They had been blown all the way down there from Sicily. As it happened, the place they came ashore was quite near to Carthage, and Juno began at once to consider how she could turn this arrival to their disadvantage and the advantage of the Carthaginians. Carthage had been founded by a woman, Dido, who was still its ruler, and under whom it was growing into a great and splendid city. She was beautiful and a widow. Aeneas had lost his wife on the night he left Troy. Juno's plan was to have the two fall in love with each other, and so divert Aeneas from Italy and induce him to settle down with Dido. It would have been a good plan if it had not been for Venus. She suspected what was in Juno's mind, and determined to block it. She had her own plan. She was quite willing to have Dido fall in love with Aeneas so that no harm could come to him in Carthage. But she intended to see that his feeling for Dido should be no more than an entire willingness to take anything she wanted to give, by no means such as to interfere in the least with his sailing away to Italy whenever that seemed best. At this juncture, she went up to Olympus to talk to Jupiter. She reproached him, and her lovely eyes filled with tears. Her dear Aeneas was all but ruined, she said, and he, the king of gods and men, had sworn to her that Aeneas should be the ancestor of a race who would someday rule the world. Jupiter laughed and kissed away her tears. He told her that what he had promised would surely come to pass. Aeneas's descendants would be the Romans, to whom the fates had decreed a boundless and endless empire. Venus took her leave greatly comforted, but to make matters still more sure, she turned for help to her son Cupid. Dido, she thought, could be trusted to make unaided the necessary impression upon Aeneas, but she was not at all certain that Aeneas by himself could get Dido to fall in love with him. She was known not to be susceptible. All the kings of the country round about had tried to persuade her to marry them with no success. So Venus summoned Cupid, who promised that he would set Dido's heart on fire with love as soon as she laid eyes on Aeneas. It was a simple matter for Venus to bring about a meeting between the two. The morning after they landed, Aeneas, with his friend, the faithful Aeneas, left his wretched, shipwrecked followers to try to find out what part of the world they were in. He spoke cheering words to them before he started. Comrades, you and I have long acquaintance with sorrow. Evils still worse we have known. These also will end. Call back courage. Send away gloomy fear, perhaps some day to remember. This trouble too will bring pleasure. As the two heroes explored the strange country, Venus, disguised as a huntress, appeared to them. She told them where they were and advised them to go straight to Carthage, whose queen would surely help them. Greatly reassured, they took the path Venus pointed out, protected, although they did not know it, by a thick mist she wrapped around them. So they reached the city without interference and walked unnoticed through the busy streets. Before a great temple they paused, wondering how they could get to the queen, and there new hope came to them. As they gazed at the splendid building, they saw marvelously carved upon the walls the battles around Troy, in which they themselves had taken part. They saw the likenesses of their foes and their friends, the sons of Atreus, old Priam stretching out his hand to Achilles, the dead Hector. I take courage, Aeneas said. Here too there are tears for things, and hearts are touched by the fate of all that is mortal. At that moment, Dido, lovely as Diana herself, approached with a great train of attendants. Forthwith the mist around Aeneas dissolved, and he stood forth beautiful as Apollo. When he told her who he was, the queen received him with the utmost graciousness, and welcomed him and his company to her city. She knew how these desolate, homeless men felt, for she herself had come to Africa with a few friends, fleeing from her mother who wanted to murder her. Not ignorant of suffering, I have learned how to help the unfortunate, she said. She gave a splendid banquet for the strangers that night, at which Aeneas told their story, the fall of Troy first, and then their long journeying. They spoke admirably and eloquently, and perhaps Dido would have succumbed to such heroism and such beautiful language, even if there had been no god in the case. But as it was, Cupid was there and she had no choice. For a time she was happy. Aeneas seemed devoted to her, and she was, for her part, lavished everything she had on him. She gave him to understand that her city was his as well as she herself. He, a poor shipwrecked man, had equal honor with her. She made the Carthaginians treat him as if he too were their ruler. His companions as well were distinguished by her favor. She could not do enough for them. In all this she wanted only to give. She asked nothing for herself except Aeneas's love. On his side he received what her generosity bestowed with great contentment. He lived at his ease with a beautiful woman and a powerful queen to love him and provide everything for him, and arrange hunting parties for his amusement, and not only permit him but beg him to tell over and over again the tale of his adventures. It is a small wonder that this idea of setting sail for an unknown land grew less and less attractive to him. Juno was very well satisfied with the way things were going, but even so, Venus was quite undisturbed. She understood Jupiter better than his wife did. She was sure that he would make Aeneas in the end go to Italy, and that this little interlude with Dido would not be in the least to her son's discredit. She was quite right. Jupiter was very effective when he once roused himself. He dispatched Mercury to Carthage with a stinging message for Aeneas. The god found the hero walking about, dressed to admiration, with a superb sword at his side, studded with jasper, and over his shoulders a beautiful cloak of purple inwrought with thread of gold, both Dido's presents, of course, the latter, indeed, the work of her own hands. Suddenly this elegant gentleman was startled out of his state of indolent contentment. Stern words sounded in his ear. "How long are you going to waste time here in idle luxury?" a severe voice asked. He turned, and Mercury, visibly the god, stood before him. "The ruler of heaven himself has sent me to you," he said. "He bids you depart and seek the kingdom which is your destiny." With that he vanished as a wreath of mist dissolves into the air, leaving Aeneas awed and excited, indeed, and determined to obey, but chiefly wretchedly conscious how very difficult it was going to be with Dido. He called his men together and ordered them to fit out a fleet and prepare her immediate departure, but to do it all secretly. Nevertheless, Dido learned, and she sent for him. She was very gentle with him at first. She could not believe that he really meant to leave her. "Is it from me you would fly?" she asked. "Let these tears plead for me. This hand I gave to you. If I have in any way deserved well of you, if anything of mine was ever sweet to you." He answered that he was not the man to deny that she had done well by him, and that he would never forget her. But she on her side must remember that he had not married her, and was free to leave her whenever he chose. Jupiter had ordered him to go, and he must obey. "Cease these complaints," he begged her, "which only trouble us both." Then she told him what she thought, how she had come to her castaway, starving, in need of everything, and how she had given herself and her kingdom to him. But before his complete impassivity, her passion was helpless. In the midst of her burning words, her voice broke. She fled from him and hid herself where no one could see her. The Trojans sailed that same night very wisely. One word from the queen and their departure would have been forever impossible. On shipboard, looking back at the walls of Carthage, Aeneas saw them illumined by great fire. He watched the flames leap up and slowly die down, and he wondered what was the cause. All unknowing, he was looking at the glow of Dido's funeral pyre. Then she saw that he was gone, and she killed herself. So yeah, that's wow. There's always an unfortunate luck when it comes to relations in many of these tales. And we see it in this one. Okay. But we're going to end that episode. So yeah. It is we see Aeneas take off from Troy, and even though Juno, aka Hera, strongly dislikes him, his mother, Venus, aka Aphrodite, does what she can to give him luck. So yeah. She even has Dido fall in love with him. At which is again this act of the gods meddling into human affairs. And Zeus being like, it's necessary for him to travel. Jupiter, aka Zeus. But yeah. He, he's like, alright, time to have him head off to Italy. But yeah, we see again mention of Scylla and Charybdis. It might be Scylla, I'm not sure, but yeah. Oh. Anyway, that'll be it for this episode. As always, thank you. Educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.